In 2018, a small team of researchers at NYU pointed a new kind of live tissue camera at ordinary human tissue and found something that, as far as anyone can tell, doctors had been looking straight through for centuries. Not a rare structure tucked into some obscure corner of the body. A body-wide network of fluid-filled spaces, held open by a loose lattice of collagen, the tough structural protein that gives tissue its shape. Running under your skin, around your gut, through the sheets of tissue wrapped around every muscle you own. Once the team knew how to look for it, they found it almost everywhere they checked. They called it the Interstitium, and within about a year or so, a second stranger conversation started up alongside the purely scientific one. People kept asking why the maps of this newly found network looked so oddly familiar. The story of how it was found is almost as interesting as what was found. The team wasn't out looking for a new organ. They were studying bile ducts using a relatively new tool called probe-based confocal laser endomicroscopy. In plain terms, a flexible camera small enough to slide inside the body and photograph living tissue at a near microscopic level in real time without cutting anything out first. Partway through, the images on screen showed something nobody expected. A lattice of open, fluid-filled chambers where the textbooks said there should simply be dense, solid tissue. At first, more than one person in the room assumed it was an imaging artifact. It wasn't. Here's the part that usually gets left out of the headlines. For as long as doctors have examined tissue under a microscope, they've prepared their samples the same basic way. Slice it thin, soak it in chemical fixative, stain it, look. That process works beautifully for most things. For the interstitium, it was a quiet disaster. The fixing chemicals drain the fluid out of these spaces almost instantly, and the loose collagen lattice collapses flat the moment the water leaves. Pathologists had been staring at this tissue for 200 years. They just saw it deflated, pressed thin against everything around it, and assumed it was nothing more than dense connective packaging. It took a live tissue imaging technique, one that could examine the body without first killing and drying the sample, to catch the interstitium the way it actually exists, full, fluid, and open. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. Once researchers, led by the pathologist Neil Theis, could finally see the network intact, its scale became obvious. This wasn't some small structure tucked into a single organ, but a continuous lattice running through nearly every tissue type in the body. By total volume, it may be one of the largest connected spaces in the human body. Some scientists now argue it deserves to be classified as an organ in its own right, on the same list as the skin or the liver. Others are more cautious about the label, and that debate is still genuinely unsettled. What almost no one disputes anymore is that the network is there, that it's continuous, and that it had simply never been seen intact before 2018. So what does it actually do? The honest answer is that researchers are still working that out. What's reasonably well established so far, the interstitium appears to act as a kind of shock absorber, cushioning tissues that get compressed and stretched constantly. The gut wall as food moves through it, the lungs as they expand and collapse with every breath you take, the skin as it stretches and recoils around a moving joint. It's also thought to be a major, previously uncounted source of the fluid that eventually drains into your lymphatic system, the network responsible for clearing waste and supporting immune function. Some researchers have gone further, speculating that the way cancer cells spread through the body, a process doctors have puzzled over for decades, might be partly explained by tumor cells finding an easier path through this open, fluid-filled network than through solid tissue. That idea is still very much unproven, but it's exactly the kind of question a newly visible structure tends to raise. In short, what emerged from that 2018 paper is a body-wide drainage and cushioning system, threaded through nearly every tissue you have, sitting somewhere between clearly important and not yet understood. Now here's where it gets strange. Long before anyone had a microscope capable of seeing this, several older medical traditions had already drawn a body-wide network of channels running through more or less the same territory. In classical Chinese medicine, these are called meridians, jingluo, pathways said to carry qi, usually translated as vital energy or life force, connecting every organ to the surface of the body and to each other. In the yogic tradition, the equivalent idea is the Nadi. The Shiva Samhita, a Sanskrit text on yoga, And the subtle body, compiled sometime around the 16th or 17th century, describes the body as containing an almost unimaginable number of these channels. The text puts the figure at 72,000, with 3 considered central, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, running roughly along the length of the spine and carrying prana, the same vital breath and life force referenced throughout the yogic canon. Neither tradition was describing blood vessels or nerves. Both systems already had separate words for those and drew them on separate charts entirely. What they were pointing at was something else, a subtler, body-wide network, distinct from the plumbing anyone could already see laid open on a dissection table. Both traditions also agreed on something else worth mentioning, that health depended on this network staying open and flowing, and that illness followed when it became blocked or stagnant. Acupuncture, at its core, is built around the idea of releasing blockages along the meridians. A great deal of Hatha yoga is built around a nearly identical claim about the Nadis, that certain postures, breathing patterns, and periods of stillness exist specifically to clear the channels and let prana move freely again. It's worth sitting with how strange it is that this same basic logic, a body-wide network, prone to blockage, treatable by encouraging it to move, shows up independently in medical systems from opposite sides of the world. It would be dishonest to say modern anatomy has confirmed meridians or nadis exist exactly as these old maps describe them. It hasn't. Neil Theis himself, in interviews after the 2018 paper came out, has been fairly open about finding the resemblance suggestive rather than proven. The two frameworks describe their networks in very different terms, and no peer-reviewed study has shown that acupuncture points sit directly on interstitial pathways. What can be said, honestly, is narrower, and in its own way, still fairly remarkable. Several traditions, working with nothing but patient attention and centuries of accumulated observation, independently propose that the body is threaded with a connected, body-wide network distinct from its blood vessels and nerves. It took Western medicine until 2018 to find physical tissue that actually fits that description. Here's the counterintuitive part. For decades, the tissue we now call the interstitium got lumped in with something else modern medicine also tended to dismiss without much thought. Fascia, the webbing of connective tissue wrapped around every muscle, organ, and bone you have. Surgeons cut through it to reach the real tissue underneath. Physiology textbooks gave it a paragraph, if that. It was treated as inert packaging, biological bubble wrap, present but not particularly interesting. That assumption is quietly falling apart. Fascia, and the interstitial fluid woven through it, is now understood to be dense with nerve endings. By some estimates, more richly innervated than muscle tissue itself, and to respond directly to movement, hydration, and mechanical pressure. The bodyworker and researcher Thomas Myers, whose book Anatomy Trains reshaped how a lot of physical therapists think about the body, mapped continuous lines of fascia running the full length of the human frame. From the sole of the foot up through the back of the leg, along the spine, and over the top of the skull, all one unbroken sheet in places textbooks had always drawn as separate, unrelated muscles. Pull on one end of one of these lines and tension can show up somewhere that seems, at first, to have nothing to do with it. Tight hamstrings connected to a stiff neck, by way of tissue most people never knew was continuous at all. Tissue that goes unused for long stretches tends to grow stiffer and less hydrated. The collagen fibers lose their loose, gliding arrangement and start to mat together, not unlike a rope left out to dry and stiffen in the sun. Tissue that moves regularly, especially through slow, sustained stretching rather than short, sudden motion, tends to stay more hydrated and pliable over time. There's one more claim worth addressing honestly, since it's often the first thing people ask about this tissue. Practitioners of myofascial release, a hands-on bodywork approach pioneered by the physical therapist John Barnes, have reported for decades that patients sometimes experience a sudden rush of emotion, occasionally tears, during a slow fascial release with no clear physical cause. Barnes and others in this field describe it as tissue holding old patterns of bracing, released all at once when the fascia finally lets go. Mainstream neuroscience has not confirmed a specific mechanism for this, and it remains an observation from clinical practice rather than a settled finding. But it's reported often enough by enough independent practitioners that it's difficult to dismiss outright as coincidence, which means the old instinct to sit still and protect an aching body may, once again, be exactly backward. What this tissue actually seems to want isn't stillness. It's slow, whole-body movement, repeated often enough to keep the fluid inside it moving too. That happens to be a fairly accurate description of what a great deal of yoga already is. So here's tonight's practice, and it's about as simple as this channel gets. Come to standing, feet a comfortable distance apart, knees soft rather than locked. Inhale and let your arms float slowly overhead as your spine lengthens. On the exhale, fold forward from the hips, letting your head and arms hang heavy, knees bending as much as they need to. Then slowly, roll back up one vertebra at a time, letting your head be the very last thing to arrive, arms trailing loosely at your sides the whole way. Repeat this slow roll down and up 4 or 5 times. Don't rush it and don't chase a deep stretch. Flexibility isn't really the point tonight. Motion is. One long, unhurried wave traveling the full length of your spine, asking the tissue wrapped around it to glide instead of sit there. If you want to take it a little further, add a few slow shoulder rolls and gentle spinal twists afterward. Still standing, still unhurried. Let your arms swing loosely with each twist rather than forcing the rotation. The goal is momentum, not effort. None of this should ever hurt. The whole practice is closer to watering something than working it. This is not medical advice, and it will not undo 200 years of misunderstood anatomy in a single evening. But it's a start. A few honest minutes spent moving a tissue that spent most of medical history being mistaken for nothing worth noticing at all. In 2018, a handful of researchers finally saw, in living tissue, something several old traditions had apparently been describing in their own language for a very long time. Whatever you want to call the network running through you, Interstitium, Meridians, Nadi, it seems to want roughly the same thing tonight that it has always wanted, to keep moving, so it doesn't get mistaken all over again for nothing at all.